technical skills, because I don't know how many are going to be on that final Thursday symposium of this academic year. Let's go out on a semi-high, because let's see how it goes as well, because Christian is very keen to give a talk. He won't tell me what it's on.
Yes.
So we're going to assume that this is going to be our high.
All right.
And then
Okay.
and then it will get better, and that's wonderful. So everybody, really talking about Prometheus down, not bound, not Prometheus.
Oh no. It's gone. All right. It's back. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be talking about theories about technology. So technology in the abstract, rather than looking at kind of specific technologies, and how thought around technology has evolved. And I'm going to start by discussing Nietzsche's implicit ideas around technology. And so he takes Schopenhauer's. He was a follower of Schopenhauer, and his first work, which is called The Birth of Tragedy, is it's often kind of forgotten, but I think it's the most kind of essential Nietzsche, because essentially what he lays out is a theory of how Greek tragedy essentially embodies the decline of Greek culture. And he borrows a term from a Swiss philosopher called Bockhofen, who isn't very well read, but in his work Mother Right, he sets up a Dionysiac principle and an Apollinean principle. And the Dionysiac is sorry, I just saw a Bouvet's face. The Dionysiac is associated with the mother and the kind of mystery of being, whereas the Apollinean is the rational and the structured. And so he uses these terms to describe the transition of Greek tragedy, and he starts by discussing early Greek tragedy, which the chorus is at the forefront of all early Greek tragedy, and he associates it with musicality. And I mean, the Birth of Tragedy is, half about Greek tragedy, half a love letter to Wagner. He was an opera composer, but he says the musical element, so the chorus, represents this Dionysiac principle, and then at the time, Aeschylus, who wrote Prometheus Bound, represents the height of this tension between Apollonian and Dionysiac, because he has the chorus discussing with Prometheus, who the myth is he stole fire from the godity, and so it's that idea of imposing order and kind of understanding the gods. I think that's how it's going to be used in this talk. And then you get with Euripides the transition to he removes the chorus entirely, and he begins to prioritize the Apollonian over the Dionysian. And this is well represented in Medea, who was originally from Georgia, which is where Paloma's from. And her coming into society is represent, and then she eventually kind of burns down the house with her and then kills her children. So it's about the destructive force. It's about the destructive force of the Dionysian principle and the fear that Euripides had around it. But then what Nietzsche applies to this with philosophy is that he says that Euripides was a follower of or a friend of Socrates, and Socrates is the first rational man. So he sets up this idea that the rational man is the one who instigates the fall of society by introducing a kind of technology to it. And on a side note, you see this kind of hatred of the Dionysian in the works of Plato. He, in Republic, banishes all poets and artists, which is kind of ironic, because the artists are the one who create culture and the basis of civilization, and so you see it enters its kind of fall when they begin to be exiled from society. And then what Oswald Spengler does is he takes this paradigm of the decline into rationalization, and he applies it to the broad civilizational theory in his magnum opus, The Decline of the West. He highlights there being a group of figures who instigate this decline, who essentially are the first Socratic men who begin to impose rationality over anything, any kind of religion or belief in that sense. And so a few examples is the Buddha, who eliminates kind of broader ideas about religion and says it's all about like meditation and things. That's why Buddhism, it really shouldn't be considered a religion. It's more of a kind of philosophy. And then the people in our Western civilization, which spans about from the year like 1200-ish to now. He says that the French rationalists like Voltaire and Rousseau began to undo the like metaphysics of the previous cultural flowering stage, and they begin to undo this and precipitate the fall. But his specific work on technology is Man and Technics, and he says that the hand developed alongside the tool and the tool alongside the hand. There was never a point in history where the hand developed in man and there was no tool. And so he says that all animals have techniques, but what distinguishes human ideas about techniques is that we begin to introduce the difference between the hand and the mind and the eye. And this begins to remove us from nature because we begin to think separately from nature, and then this is how society is formed, because it creates a kind of inner dependence within society of people on other people's skills, rather than having all the kind of facets within a family situation. And then this also gives rise to what he describes as the fact man and the truth man. And these are both like destiny ideals, is what he calls them. And he points to John 18, where Jesus says to Pontius Pilate, "I am here to bring the truth of God." And Pontius Pilate says, "What is truth? I don't care about truth," basically. And so you have this tension between the statesman and the priest or the religious figure in society. And he says that the destiny ideal emerges from an early stage in that civilization where religion and science are both kind of interconnected. And he points to the 13th century monks like Petrus Peregrinus and Roger Bacon. And he says this is a manifestation of the Western ideal for infinite space, because or the idea of the infinite progression, because he says that their world conception was that God was working on the universe as if a machine, and tinkering away at it and adding things. He says that just as in our civilization, the early science kind of characterizes our destiny, so too does the other civilizations. So to name a few, the Magian civilization, which is just from about the time of Jesus to the fall of the Byzantine Empire in like the 12th century. That's the beginning of the fall, kind of. He says that this is their destiny idea, is God is always imposing on them and telling them what to do and punishing them. So this is the idea of Job, if you know the biblical story. Is God just basically punishing this one man? And then Islam is literally means submission to the will of Allah. So it's that idea of a kind of fate beyond your understanding and comprehension. And then one of the other things he points out is in the development of the West, there are two main ways in which it will fall, and I think possibly a combination of the two. He says that, and I mean it's slightly dated language, I think, in the extract that I've chosen, but the is basically, he says that the everyone looks at their paper, that the West will fall due to an overextension of its kind of drive for technologicization, and this is because foreign countries will take on our technology and actually do it better than us, and then invade or not invade but overtake us, as seen in like the 1870s during the Meiji Restoration in Japan. They essentially took on Western technology and progressed in decades to where we are now, like to where we were then, and have now since kept up with us. I think, and then the other way is that he says like society Western society will fall due to and like its control of nature. And Toynbee, who's another historian who takes Spengler's model and kind of he modifies it a bit, and I'm reading him at the moment. But he says the external barbarian, who is the person who the people who come in and invade civilizations if they fall that way. He says that they are always on the side of time, and I don't think the West is going to be invaded as such. But to give you some statistics, CO2 is now 432 parts per million, which is the highest it's been in six. Sorry, I'm really bad handwriting. 650,000 years, and then Greenland ice will have risen about 7 feet by 2100, and so what this will do will essentially it will flood port cities and will just force a kind of protection against of Western society against the environment, but this will ultimately be precipitate a fall. And then what Heidegger does, who doesn't like metaphysical systems as seen in Spengler, he kind of merely diagnoses technology in the abstract. But I think what makes him very challenging as a philosopher is that his essays always kind of presuppose you having read all of his other essays. So I need to talk about one essay before I talk about another essay. And the essay I'm going to talk about is on the essence of truth, which he doesn't like the adequatio theory, which is the kind of Cartesian idea where objects correlate to your idea of them as a truth. So you say your idea of it is soft, and then you touch it and it is soft, and then that makes it a truth. Which might be an oversimplification, but he doesn't like this because it presupposes that the subject, which is you, who is testing the truth, aren't in a world with that object, and so he sees it. He describes it as objects as phenomena coming in through the clearing or the Lichtung, and in a kind of very abstract way. And this is why I chose this painting, because you have this idea of a kind of murky depth, and then the phenomena coming through. But the key thing is that differentiates him is he basically builds error into his truth system. So he says that you can't get a full truth because you're always in a world that presupposes an understanding of the object before you even propose a truth to it. To give an example, to us, this it's a bit of a crude coarse example, but to us, if you see a table, it can correlate to your idea of a table, so you know it's true as a table. But to someone who has never seen a table before in a completely different civilization, they wouldn't see it as a table necessarily, because so he has this. It's almost like his idea, his model of truth is as if you're looking at a sculpture with a light being beamed on it, and you're only getting a fraction, a slice of the sculpture, and not getting a full truth. And so with this kind of idea, he argues that science imposes an imperial gaze on the world, and in Being and Time, he says that the world, science deworlds the world, so it excavates it out of its natural being and sees it as standing reserve, and which basically means he opposes the scientist to the artist, where the scientist sees it for its natural resources and exploits it for that. The artist, as McLuhan said, they reveal an invisible environment. So they reveal a kind of world that we're in. And by world, he doesn't mean the physical world. He means a world as in the way in which you are being. And so he says that it imposes a imperial gaze, and that what is problematic about technology is that it removes all other the possibility of all other um, ways of seeing the world. And he says that the way the human being exists as existence, which is he basically means by that we exist with an opportunity to understand and inhabit many different ways of being and many different understandings of being. And so technology by removing this is dangerous because it suggests a kind of essential truth and a kind of like uh, certainty that he doesn't see as imminent. And then, but what you can see as a through line with all these philosophers is that they essentially see art as a kind of salvific force and a creative force, but technology is ultimately destructive to a civilization. And then now I'm going to talk about a slightly more modern example who you might have heard of. He's called Theodore Kaczynski, or the Unabomber, and he's been kind of termed an eco-terrorist. He wasn't an eco-terrorist because he wasn't kind of part of the ecology movement or any like eco movement. But in 1971 he bought a plot of land in Montana. He was Harvard educated, and then in 1978 he realized he had just had enough of society, and he had been secluded in this cabin for quite a few years, and then he decided to start sending bombs. And I'm not like advocating for obviously. But he sent a bomb and he started sending bombs to like science teachers and in universities and stuff because um, and then he the reason he did this was to bring attention to his philosophy and what he saw as dangerous about technology. And so how he was caught was he requested that the Times publish his manifesto, which is called Industrial Society and Its Failures. And the reason he was caught was because his brother basically recognized the previous draft and was like, "It's my brother," which and then he was part of an anarchist group called the FC, and this is a reference to Joseph Conrad's 1907 novel *The Secret Agent*, which is about a secret society called the FP, which stands for the Future of the Proletariat. And I'll come back to the idea of the proletariat later, but I'm just going to discuss his ideas around technology. Oh yes, that's him. And so he has this very Tolkien-esque understanding of technology, which is basically a complete rejection of it. He kind of says like technology is kind of like a former drunk sitting in front of like a bottle of alcohol, and then if you have a little sip, then it's just like you can't, you just have to completely destroy it, if that makes sense. But then he says that freedom is incompatible with technological society. And if you've read any Nietzsche, like the primary the primary concern that underlies a lot of his work is the idea of freedom. And then he says that processes of power. No, he says the power process is basically where the individual has a self-determined goal and then completes this goal and then is fulfilled as a person. However, he sees power as imposing goals that aren't related to the individual. So you can see how Nietzsche's kind of idea of the Übermensch, which is a very kind of individualistic philosophy, is coming through here. He's not concerned with a kind of collective goal, but and then he's the individual is imposed upon by impersonal companies and takes up things like hobbies and inauthentic ways of achieving that goal. But he says that this creates kind of frustration in society. One thing he points out is that technology certainly does restrict freedom, as opposed to economic changes in society are the things that restrict freedom rather than political decisions. And he points to the fact that the Renaissance city-states were essentially run by dictators, but no one was concerned by freedom or about freedom due to the fact that they had the freedom to pursue these kind of individual ideas, and also technology wasn't imposing upon them how to be. Um, I've chosen an image of the French peasantry in the 19th century, who, and this is one of my favorite paintings, but the French peasantry are a good example because they essentially underwent a complete displacement of their way of being from technology, and this resulted in kind of the riots of the like 1848. Like, they were a contributing factor and things like that. So you can see that technology kind of displaces the human and like replaces their way of being for an imposed way of being. One thing he also says is that technology always appears to be optional and a convenience at first. Like, for instance, he points to the automobile and roads, and he says that at first it was seen as a good thing and a better mode of transport. However, what the effect was it essentially removed freedoms from the pedestrian as the pedestrian became alienated and a rarity as roads began to be imposed, and, for instance, crossing the road became harder and harder. And so he sees it essentially as a kind of like snowball effect, whereby if you don't join in, you become left behind. So he doesn't see it as like something that you're in control of. And I think he's comparable to Lao Tzu in the Chinese civilization in the 6th century BC, who had a similar function, who hated the Chinese philosopher Confucius, Confucius' idea that you were participating in a kind of grand city state and that you had to basically embrace being told what to do by, like, obviously not technocrats, but the equivalent of technocrats, so business owners and stuff like that in that society. But he has been adopted somewhat by the left, but he was very critical of the left, like Nietzsche was, because he essentially said that the left they didn't like the kind of individualistic way of being that technology encourages, but because they have inherited essentially a kind of masochistic role in society whereby they huddle together as a group and form kind of groups. But he doesn't like that because they will always retain some small part of technology. They won't go kind of cold turkey, which is kind of what he wants them to do. But the another thing that he talks about, and I've referenced two of Foucault's works. This is a French philosopher called Foucault, who is a deconstructivist, which basically means he doesn't like any kind of metaphysical systems. And the metaphysical system that he's most kind of appalled by is the idea of technological progress. He sees he essentially is like the inheritor of Nietzsche, the kind of Nietzsche's ideas, I think. And so what he sees is the madhouse emerges from Renaissance society and becomes more and more important and sections away the mad from society. And he doesn't see this as justified, and sees it as an abuse of power rather than a good to society. This is kind of exemplified by something like Hamlet, where so Hamlet is pretending to be mad, and then Claudius, who's the king who has killed his father, only begins to be suspicious of his madness and sends him off to England as a kind of joke. That's just one of Shakespeare's jokes because we're all mad in England. But I think, but then he only gets suspicious of Hamlet and sends him to England when he begins to think that he's not actually mad. So and he exists in the Danish court for quite some time being mad. So you can see that there's no attempt to kind of distance the mad, and this kind of dislike of irrationality and the kind of Dionysian, to bring it back to Nietzsche, is he says a symptom of cultural decline. And I think at one point he signed a petition to remove free all prisoners, which is pretty cool. But and I think I've also referenced a thing from Discipline and Punish, which he examines the prison system as opposed to the madhouse. I promise I'm finished in a second. But so what you can see with Ted Kaczynski, or the Unabomber, is that he essentially is what Toynbee, in his study of history, describes as an internal proletariat. So that's someone who he describes it as they are in a society but not of the society. So they are effectively excluded in some way, or feel excluded in some way. and you can kind of trace. I've tried to kind of like trace a few cases of the internal proletariat, and one of the two of the most kind of interesting, I think, and are the Jews in the Mesopotamian society, which is like Babylon, and the in Genesis, which is I think most scholars put it around like the 6th century BC. They obviously come up with this idea of the Tower of Babel, and what people overlook is that this is very much a pastiche of the Babylonian ziggurat, which were these kind of massive structures with this is kind of the remains of one. And of course, it precedes the fall of the Tower of Babel, and so they were prescient of the kind of the very kind of wait, it's hard to say what technology is. I think that's what I found doing this, but like the kind of I suppose the Socratic mindset of the Babylonians, and the Jews are prescient of their fall in writing Genesis, and then the Jews once again in the Book of Revelations are parodying the Roman way of life, especially with the Whore of Babylon. And there's a whole sequence where they're kind of pastiching the Roman city and the idea of the walled city and things like that. But the Whore of Babylon is kind of the most immediate kind of pastiche, I suppose. And this is a Roman mosaic depicting prostitution. So you can, and of course, the point of Revelation is that it is apocalyptic literature, which is critical of Rome. Oh, I forgot to say the Toynbee in his study of history says the internal proletariat who acts against the rationalization of society is like he gives the example of the Maccabean revolt in the 2nd century, no, 5th century AD. No, it was BC. Where sorry, I'm all over the place. Whereby like Antiochus the Fourth begins. He's got a very rational mindset, and he in the Hellenistic period, so just before Greece's fall, and he begins to introduce the planning of like infrastructure in society. But what he also does is he makes the Jew kind of external to the society, and they begin to, and that's what precipitates the Maccabean revolt. And then in the Islamic society, so that is the one I mentioned earlier from Jesus 2 about the fall of the Byzantine Empire. There's a historian, this guy who I really, really like at the moment, who I just discovered, so he's very cool. He's called Ibn Khaldun, and he is essentially the Spengler of the Islamic society, because he has this kind of cyclical idea. It's not just cyclical; it's to do with the kind of organic structure of society, and the reasons for the fall are key. And he shares this kind of understanding of the fall being the development of infrastructure and the kind of abandoning of like religious morality. And so I think in the extract I give you, he kind of criticizes the kind of hedonistic lifestyle of some people in the Islamic world. And then I suppose this leaves the question: who is the internal proletariat, or discussing the fall, or the fall of the West? And I'm not sure. I don't really have an answer besides Ted Kaczynski, but he's a kind of isolated incident. But there is the Marxist philosopher Walter Benjamin, and I'm not a fan of Marxism because I see it as a kind of meta narrative which kind of pulls the class struggle to the forefront of everything that I don't think is apparent. But what I think he is really helpful for is his great work, the Arcades Project, which is essentially a critique of Parisian society, whereby the development of the arcades and the infrastructure surrounding that creates this kind of dream world of capitalism. And I think it's an interesting idea that you have these kind of endless windows going along, and I think that might correlate to, he would definitely say that correlates to TikTok or something like that, where you have the endless kind of, but yes, so that's the state of kind of the West, I suppose. And I mean, I'm not, yes, as I said, I'm not sure about who would fulfill the internal proletariat on a more general scale. Toynbee suggests that it's the descendants of former slaves. However, I'm not so sure, because I think they've been integrated into the kind of body social, but it would be,